Well, welcome back, everybody, to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. We are here this Thursday, January 19th, for our afternoon session. We're continuing to talk about the Cannabis Control Board and our jurisdiction in the market, and we're going to hear from Cannabis Control Board chair and staff, and we have a couple of the other members of the board here. So thank you for being with us. Do you want us to do an introduction to folks? I know we have a lot of new faces on the board. I'm trying to be better about that. If that would be helpful for us to just really quickly know who's on the committee.
I listened to Michelle earlier, and I feel like she did it then, but
no, I've heard it too. So
okay, great. Then I just wanted to be welcoming, and we can dispense with that since you all have been paying attention to our earlier testimony. So yeah, thanks for being here. I'll turn it over to you all, and I want to hear an introduction and overview and
great. Bring
the committee up to speed.
I'm going to start just because I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Bryn Hare. I'm the executive director of the Cannabis Control Board. I'm going to get to sit here and listen to Pepper as he gives you a nice, thorough introduction to the board's work. I do have to leave a little bit early to go to another committee, but it's wonderful to be here. Nice to meet the new members and good to see those of you that I know.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm James Pepper. I'm the chair of the Cannabis Control Board. So it is a real pleasure to be here. I know cannabis doesn't always rise to the top of many people's list of priorities, but I think it really is an important issue. It's a very quickly evolving industry, and it requires a lot of oversight, both by the Cannabis Board and this committee, frankly, to kind of stay ahead of the market to the extent that we can. I hate to use a PowerPoint as a crutch, but I did make one just because I think there's a couple of kind of graphical representations of where the board is currently that I think are better to be done visually. It should be up on the committee website. I also posted kind of 3 of our legislative reports to the committee website just because they're going to be relevant to the conversation today. They are up on the kind of legislative reports website as well. But
the introduction is the PowerPoint. The
PowerPoint introduction. That's right. So I'm going to just move on to kind of slide 4. And really I put this is kind of the history of cannabis regulation. I know Michelle did a kind of really quick introduction, but it's very hard to kind of get in the head of a regulator or to get in the head of a kind of oversight body like this one without really understanding the current landscape of cannabis. So, cannabis is a Schedule I controlled substance. That is the Controlled Substance Act places various substances on kind of one of 5 schedules based upon their medical use, their potential for abuse, the kind of safety or risk for dependence. And you see marijuana or cannabis is the most highly regulated Schedule I substance. It's on there with heroin, MDMA, and that being said, then slide 5 kind of shows that a lot of states have kind of mostly through ballot initiative, have decided to legalize cannabis at the state level. I'm not going to go through all of this. Vermont doesn't have a binding ballot initiative process. And so we had to do this legislatively. And we are actually the first state to legalize cannabis legislatively. This committee had an incredibly outsized voice in the kind of original structure. Most states, the ballot initiative lays out what the structure is going to look like. Here it happened legislatively. On slide 6, you can just see the basic timeline of how things evolved in Vermont. We started with a medical program, then we legalized home grow. That is an aberration from every other state. No one legalizes home grow first and then does adult rec. We did it here, and then as of 2020, you established the Cannabis Control Board, and we had our first legal sales in October of 2022. Slide 7 is just a kind of graphical representation of the kind of state of affairs nationally. You might wonder, well, how can this happen if this is a federally controlled substance? In 2013, Eric Holder, the Attorney General, released what's called the Cole Memoranda. It lays out 8 priorities that if a state system follows these priorities, then they will be deprioritized for federal enforcement. And so almost everything that we do has to be through the lens of these 8 priorities. And I'm not going to go through all 8, but they are on slide 8. In 2014, these 8 priorities were incorporated into what's called the FinCEN guidance. This allows cannabis banking. If kind of banks follow these principles, then this will not be considered trafficking in drug money or, and then in 2014, also this kind of amendment got added to the budget, and it's been added to every continuing resolution since then, which just essentially says that if you have a legal medical program, then the Department of Justice can't use any of their funds to disrupt that. And there's been a complementary one for the adult use that's been introduced every year. It's never passed. It's been put on by the House and then taken off by the Senate almost every single year. 2018, there was kind of a collective kind of gulp heard around the country when Attorney General Sessions rescinded the Cole memoranda. There was a question about whether the kind of DEA raids were going to resume. They have not. So, I think, basically because this fencing guidance has incorporated many of the principles of the Cole memoranda, and because so many states have legal cannabis structures, it would be hard for the DEA to even know where to begin, honestly, with resuming kind of cannabis enforcement in legal states. Moving on to slide 10, this is just an introduction to the Cannabis Control Board. It is a 3-member independent executive branch agency. It was established in 2020 for the purpose of safely, equitably, and effectively implementing the medical and adult use laws. My fellow board members are in the room, Julie and Kyle. It started out with just us. We didn't have an office space. We didn't have laptops. We didn't have anything. We just started holding meetings. Middle of the pandemic. This is our slide 11 shows the team that we now have. We have kind of an executive team. We have 3 branches, very similar to liquor control. We have a compliance team, a licensing team, and we have our medical staff that oversee the kind of administration of the medical program. Vermont does some very unique things because this is illegal federally. Every state gets to kind of choose their own adventure as to how this is going to look. Vermont did things that no other state is doing. Very first in the one time that the legislature actually established the legislative intent of the bill. I look at the section that I highlighted. It's to move as much of the illegal cannabis market as possible into the regulated market, and to encourage participation in the regulated market by small local farmers. Almost to a T, every other state has handed out their early licenses to existing medical dispensaries. Very often these are large multi-state operators that have dispensaries in many states. Florida, I think, Trulieve, I think, has 19 locations. What we did in Vermont, what this legislature prescribed to us to do is something totally different, which is try and encourage the existing market to enter into a regulated space and give them the early ability to kind of capitalize on this market. You gave us a very powerful tool to do that. You said, create your regulations and then go line by line and determine whether this is appropriate for a small cultivator. And you define small cultivator, by the way, as 1,000 square feet or less. And, if you're an existing farmer and you're kind of trying to diversify your crop, maybe you don't need the kind of extensive regulation that a large kind of 15,000 square foot grow operation needs. And so that's what we did. We created our regulations in every aspect of the industry. And then we went line by line and kind of said, well, we're going to waive this for if you're a tier 1 small cultivator. Slide 13, another first of its kind. You said that an entity, and this defined by statute, can only obtain a maximum of 1 of each type of license. You have 6 license types. Essentially, 1 is just a combination of all the other 5. you can't stack those. You can't franchise in this. You can't have, 5 different retail locations around the state. Each entity is entitled to one license of each type. They can become vertically integrated, but you can't have multiple grow facilities. You can't have the equivalent of a 100,000 square foot grow by stacking 6 smaller licenses together. First of its kind. And then another very important thing you did was you allowed the board to really think critically about criminal history records. The vast majority of the illicit market that you asked us to bring in have convictions for cannabis-related offenses. And in a lot of other states, disqualifying. Because of the Cole memoranda, people get very concerned about who they're giving licenses to. And we have those same concerns, but you allowed us to kind of say, you told us to consider whether this individual poses a present threat to public safety or the proper functioning of the market. We can't just say anyone with a felony conviction is out, no matter how old that is or what it was for. That's been an incredible benefit to a lot of the people that are kind of excellent growers in the state, frankly. And you created and funded the Cannabis Business Development Fund. This is, again, first of its kind at the time. This is essentially a grant program that allows social equity applicants, and we can kind of dig into what social equity means a little later. This allows them to apply for a grant to help them kind of reduce the barriers to entry, which, in an industry that doesn't have access to financing, this is an incredible way to support kind of people that can't otherwise afford to get in. So the board, again, we didn't really know how to begin. Every state gets to choose their own adventure. I have a lot of experience in legislative committees, so we kind of just started operating as if we were a legislative committee. We brought in a bunch of the key sponsors, including the former chair of this committee, and just said, how do you want this market to look? Let's go through this bill line by line and figure out what your priorities were for this market. And so we established these core priorities. We listened to a lot of the folks that, a lot of the current growers and medical patients, and product manufacturers, and we really tried to establish trust, build this market the way that the legislature wanted it to look. We always, balanced the Cole memo. We did our regulatory waivers for small cultivators, and now we're in the midst of kind of our public education campaigns and kind of monitoring and refining our rules and asking for kind of some of the statutes that may be kind of incongruous to be, re-examined. Slide 15 just gives a very brief outline of what we've done. Today, we've held 157 public meetings. 82 of those are from just the Cannabis Board. 75 of those, you gave us a 14-member advisory committee, which is comprised of secretaries and commissioners and people with extreme expertise in public health and criminal justice reform, just all the aspects of kind of the cannabis industry. They met 75 times. We've held banking roundtables, social equity town halls, municipal roundtables, Q&A sessions. We have networking events that we host so that kind of we can introduce growers to product manufacturers and retailers, and they can ask us questions and we can answer them. We have one tonight on energy efficiency. On this slide, I just list some of the folks that we've talked to. It's a non-exhaustive list. And slide 16 is our basic timeline. I won't go through it all, but it kind of shows kind of where we started and where we are now. So slide 18, I know I'm going quick, but I think this is more kind of relevant to the conversation today. This committee had to work out the initial set of conditions. And what you did, you had to determine, the vast majority of states have a capped license. We're going to issue 100 cultivator licenses, this year, 20 retail licenses to private manufacturers. There's some benefits to that from a regulatory point of view. It makes our enforcement job a lot easier. But it's also very a lot of barriers to entry in that, and it really starts to only benefit people that have kind of the money to kind of hire lawyers, lobbyists, et cetera. And then it also creates a secondary value to these cannabis licenses that, also makes this very challenging to enter into this market. So you guys went with an open market structure. We do not have a cap on licenses. You allowed us to close license types if we feel like this market is getting out of balance in some way. But it's a fundamental question that you all resolved in the original bill. The market structure, you gave us the license types. You said that we can create tiers within them. We based our tiering structure to really discourage interest by large multi-state operators. I mean, I said it the last time I was here, but our largest license type that's open on the kind of indoor cultivation side is 15,000 square feet. That'd be a tier 3 out of 11 in Massachusetts, which their largest license type is 100,000 square feet. And this one license per entity rule means that they can't, a larger operator can't just, stack 6 of them together to reach that. So really, this has had the effect, and I'll get into it in just a little bit, that, this market is dominated by small cultivators, which is a great source of innovation and a great source of economic prosperity for the kind of folks that are participating in it. Whether the board was going to be excise tax supported or purely fee supported, this is related to the market structure. Essentially, the original kind of recommendation was we had to create a fee structure that would fully support the operations of the board. We did that, and it turned out the licenses would just have to be astronomically expensive in order to fully support the operations of the board. So we proposed a kind of alternative fee structure that allowed us to access a portion of the excise tax to support our budget. And the legislature ultimately adopted kind of our alternative approach. The tax rate, of course, our regulated market is always in competition with the illicit market. And we know people are willing to pay a premium for a regulated product that has met minimum safety standards, and you can go to a store to purchase it. But that kind of price elasticity starts to go away when, like we've seen in California, where there's kind of 3 sets of taxes. The products are taxed at 3 different points, and it's an effective tax rate of kind of 60 to 70%. That market is failing right now because of overtaxation. And so the tax rate in Vermont, it's a 14% excise tax, it's a 6% sales tax, and then towns can impose a 1% local option tax. I don't know if that's the right number or it's not. We're starting to get revenue data coming in from the legal market. But it's just something that needs to be looked at and evaluated. I know it's not necessarily for this committee to do, but the idea of local control is very much for this committee. The kind of compromise that came between the House and the Senate was towns have to opt in to host retail establishments. So the default provision is you don't have retail unless there's a proactive vote by the town to allow it. And then towns can form local control commissions. We're a Dillon's Rule state, so you've given towns, their traditional authority on cannabis establishments, time, place, manner restrictions on their operations, how the outward aesthetic of, a retail shop can look. So it's in line with kind of, maybe a historic neighborhood or, but beyond that, towns have very little control over kind of these cannabis establishments. So it's an area that, it's been a benefit, I think, to a lot of our cultivators that there's not a lot of red tape at the local level. But it's just something that, that we're trying to work out. We've held a number of municipal roundtables to try and kind of educate local municipalities about where their authority is and how they can kind of exercise that authority.
Representative Hango has a question.
Just a really quick question. Thank you. You mentioned municipalities and location. Do municipalities have the ability to control where a shop is located? Or was that written into the statute that there are certain prohibitions or allowances where they can be located?
Yes, that is. What the legislation, which the statute says is that you can you can adopt ordinances about things like location, but they can't have the effect of prohibiting a cannabis establishment from within your borders. You can't just say, you can't create an ordinance that says they have to be 1,000 feet from everything, and it has the effect of they can't be anywhere. Because essentially, I think the conversation that was going on at the time is, you might have a town that just voted to allow cannabis retail establishments, but you might have a select board or a planning commission that is not excited about these things, and they can kind of overrule the will of the kind of voters.
So are there any prohibitions or restrictions in state statute about where they can be located?
You asked the cannabis board to come up with them. We followed the drug-free school law. And so it's got to be 500 feet, kind of, what is it, as the crow flies from the border of one to the border of another?
The entrance, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the only restriction that.
We put it's an actual regulation. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to take this opportunity to say goodbye.
Thanks for being here. Advertising is always a subject of concern. I mean, essentially, we've learned a lot of lessons from the industry, from the tobacco industry, from the alcohol industry about advertising. I think, the legislature didn't want to see those lessons to not be heeded in this emerging industry. And, I think this committee and maybe the healthcare committee wrote, I think I can say this, the most restrictive advertising regulations. They put them into statute in the country. This is an odd sort of space that cannabis exists in. I think it's at least arguable that they be considered unconstitutional under the First Amendment. How that First Amendment applies when, this is recognized as a Schedule I drug, I don't know. But it's just something that is in the jurisdiction of this committee and should be, if there needs to be changes, it would be run through this committee. We're not recommending any changes, I should say. And then, of course, prevention and education. The bill did not want to see ease of access, perception of harm, move in the wrong direction amongst youth. And so, there was a appropriation that was made, 30% of the excise tax capped at $10 million annually will go to substance misuse prevention and education. And the entirety of the sales tax will go to after-school programs, expanding access and quality of those. So those are very historic investments that have not been made in the past.
Representative Hagan?
Sorry, 30% of the excise tax capped at what dollar amount?
10 million.
10 million.
And I think our projections are a little bit different than the Joint Fiscal Office projections, but I think we will get to that cap. I think it will be 10 million annually. Slide 19 just shows how the licenses have rolled out. We have 270 cultivator licenses that we have approved. 76% of those are for tier 1 small cultivators. This really is going to be the kind of engine of innovation of our market in a way that no other state has. Vermont has always had a difficult time competing on volume, but we have been very successful with our beer industry, our cheese industry, our maple syrup industry on creating value-added craft products. And I know a lot of kind of the larger operators think that just putting as much THC into cannabis as possible is kind of the product that people want. We're finding that no, people actually like to have a diversity of products, and that, purely kind of THC forward cannabis might not be the future, and might not be kind of the thing that people want to maybe replace a sleeping pill or kind of have, those other issues. 32 manufacturers, 9 wholesalers. I think a number that most people like to know about is the retailers. Currently, there's 37 of them. I think we have about 77 towns that have opted in. And, out of 254, I think is the number. So minority of towns have opted in, but they're pretty well geographically dispersed as of now. And another important number here, the employee ID cards. We've issued 169. There's about 300 more that are waiting to be approved. They are issued, once we get the background check, a temporary ID card. So a lot of these 300 that are waiting are probably working already. These are high-paying, good quality jobs. And I think that's just another important kind of number to keep track of. Slide 20 just shows where the retail locations are. And this includes both ones that we've issued and ones that are pending. I would say that there's 8 of them in Burlington. It's a number that I just like to kind of point out. Whether Burlington can sustain 8, we'll see. I'm not necessarily advocating for a cap on retail. I think that should be maybe a local issue or let the market determine it. But because, just because you got in first doesn't mean that you're the best. It's hard for the board to kind of make that determination. But essentially this kind of opt-in, opt-out structure has led to a little bit of clustering, because South Burlington, for instance, is not opted in. So you have 8 in Burlington, you've got 0 in South Burlington. Just something to keep an eye on. Slide 21 and 22 are are pretty important. These are the main reason why I wanted to have a PowerPoint. So the first thing that the board did was establish kind of a supply and demand model for cannabis in the state. We took the RAND report that came out in 2013, 2014. We updated that with some economists. And, we essentially got to this is how much cannabis Vermonters, our border towns, and our tourists consume. This is how much cultivation you're going to need in order to supply that demand. There's an assumption because of our climate that we were going to have kind of a large number of indoor cultivators as compared to outdoor. What we're seeing is the opposite is true. There is a huge amount of demand for outdoor cultivation. When the barriers to entry are lower, we also try to encourage outdoor cultivation through our kind of market structure and our fee structure. But there's a challenge that presents, and what you're seeing on slide 20, and then there's kind of these green peaks. And what those represent is the amount of cannabis that's going to be grown, and it's going to create an oversupply at harvest time of cannabis, which you can see on slide 22. The kind of gray line is the demand for cannabis in Vermont. And then the blue line is what the supply of cannabis is going to be. And you see these just, kind of deviations, these between those two at harvest time. And of course, what that means is that the price falls through the floor, and there's going to be a huge oversupply. And then kind of in June and July, we're going to actually not have enough cannabis to meet the demand. And so this is just something that the board takes very seriously. We update our model, as many times as we can to kind of get this kind of crystal ball as to what is going to happen with this market. This is all available online, by the way. It's for all of our kind of market to use as well. And, we're trying to, this isn't so much a problem as we ramp up and the supply chain hasn't fully formed, and the demand exceeds the supply. This becomes a problem in year 3 and 4 in the outer years. And really what it comes, the problem is that people need to think about, cultivators in particular, need to think about storage. And we need to also kind of help our product manufacturers and our testing facilities expand capacity at harvest time so that farmers can move their products to market. And so this is my last slide, slide 23. This kind of opens the conversation about the future of this market. Essentially, supporting our licensees is the board's primary concern. And, this committee has the ability to kind of help us with that. I would reiterate that this is a industry that does not have access to banking services, or I should say lending services. None of our credit unions are lending to these operations. There's no federal bankruptcy protections because of the federal status. If if there's an oversupply in Vermont, there's no outlet to New Hampshire or New York. You can't cross state lines with this stuff, and so, while there's a lot of demand for Vermont-made products in, New England and elsewhere, unless they're coming to Vermont, they can't purchase these things. So this is a very unique industry that has challenges that are specific to it. A lot of people put up their own money. There's no financing. And so if they go out of business, they are largely in a worse position than if they never got into this in the first place. So, we really need to kind of support social equity applicants, support our local farmers, our small farmers, and help kind of make this market more accessible and a little bit easier for them to kind of navigate. We submitted a report on our kind of social equity status. So social equity, essentially, I know Michelle touched on it a little bit, but this is a substance, cannabis, that we've now all kind of collectively decided is legal. We have a huge number of people in this state and across the country that have been harmed by cannabis from prohibition. And so social equity is aimed at trying to provide benefits and privileges to the people who have been harmed by cannabis in the past, historically. And so these are people that very often have cannabis-related offenses, because of those criminal history records, have been denied access to, employment opportunities, educational opportunities, political participation, et cetera. And so, the Cannabis Business Development Fund is one way that the legislature has decided to support them. And we, have internal processes to provide social equity applicants technical assistance and support. We have some additional specific proposals in our social equity report about how to kind of better support all of our licensees and kind of deal with some of these supply chain issues, supply and demand issues. THC caps. I know, this committee has done a lot of work on this issue. It's got a lot of attention last year, and the Cannabis Board was asked in a bill last year to kind of do a deep dive on kind of the issue of whether these THC caps that currently exist in law should remain. I've submitted the report. It's on your website. It's on the legislative report. One of the recommendations in that report relates to the tobacco products tax. And you might think, well, why are we messing around with the tobacco products tax? So by way of background, the legislature passed a 92% on tobacco vaping devices and liquids in 2019. This is at a time when Juuls were just exploding in popularity. They were everywhere. Kids had them. They were in schools, and other e-cigarettes too. I shouldn't just single out Juuls. And so this 92% tax was put in place to kind of discourage youth from accessing these things. And so despite this tobacco products tax existing in the cigarettes and tobacco products section of the tax code, and being called the tobacco products tax, and predating legal cannabis by over a year, a very recent ruling, I guess, decision by the tax department is that the language was written broadly enough to sweep in any kind of cartridge, including cannabis. No one really thought that was going to be the case. JFO, for instance, gave some kind of revenue projections about this market last year. They didn't think that this tax applied, so it's not part of their revenue projections. We certainly didn't think that it would apply. Even an early kind of guidance document from the tax department prior to this ruling didn't consider this tax to apply. But it is what it is now. It applies. So instead of kind of a product that would be taxed at 20% or 21%, it's now being taxed at 112 or 113%, which is an effective ban. We go into kind of in the THC or app report why banning a product that is widely available on the illicit market and represents somewhere between 20 and 25% of every other adult use market, why forcing kind of people to purchase those in an unregulated fashion could be worse for public health. I've been approached by a number of legislators to figure out, okay, well, how do you exempt cannabis products without creating a loophole that would allow maybe like an e-cigarette company to get a cannabis license and kind of get their tobacco vapes exempted as well. And so I worked with the tax department on this. There's a proposal. I think it's being sponsored by Representative Kornheiser. But I don't have the language in front of me, but if you want me to send it, kind of what we worked on with the tax.
Why don't I see if we can get it up from the Ways and Means website? Let me see if I can find an official version of it.
Okay. Yeah, I've got an unofficial version.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that the committee understands the issue that Chair Pepper has outlined. So I think it's pretty clear that the legislature intended there to be a very different tax regime for tobacco products and for cannabis products, regardless of the overlap with the method of delivery or the device. But an interpretation of the language kind of gobbled up the vape cannabis devices into the tax regime for tobacco products. So,
and I would say only because I'm here and because you're taking testimony, that the tax department and I couldn't figure out a way to exempt cannabis vaping devices that wouldn't create this loophole. Because, vaping device is interchangeable with whether it's got cannabis liquid in it or nicotine tobacco liquid in it. So what the proposal does is it exempts the liquid itself. The tax would still apply to the device, which, it's fine. The important thing is that the liquid isn't, being taxed at 113%. If the device is, we don't want to create a loophole that is exploitable by a clever tobacco company.
any questions about that? Clarifying questions for Chair Pepper before we move on? Representative Nugent.
Just, could you talk a little bit more about what you meant by effective ban?
Yes. So these products, in most other states, a vaping cartridge, which can be sold without the device. So, you can just buy the cartridge, would be probably $30, somewhere between $20 and $30. So this is more than doubling the price of it. And so what's happened is our product manufacturers aren't buying the equipment to make them. So they're not available in the regulated market in Vermont. Largely, some people are making them, but what should be a $30 product is an $85 product, and people just aren't willing to. There's not enough price. I'm not an economist, but there's not enough price elasticity for someone to purchase that on a regulated space when they can just go on Instagram and buy one for $20, $30.
And we're not, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So it's been really hard, it sounds like, to monitor the online sales still.
Yes, it is. We think that there is an effective path forward to do it. I mean, we've done it with kind of unlicensed tobacco companies that are coming in from China, et cetera, like selling things on Amazon through the Attorney General's office. There's some lessons to be learned from the Department of Liquor Control about kind of unlicensed alcohol that's coming in. There is a path, but it's very hard to kind of just stay in front of it. What we have to do is kind of just say, listen, these are unregulated products. Like, these vaping devices, the CDC said that the EVALI crisis, the electronic vaping lung associated injury, that, was responsible for 68 deaths and over close to 3,000 hospitalizations in a 6-month period, was from an adulterant that was put into illegal cannabis vapes. They said, the CDC said that the vast majority of these cases are from people using unregulated cannabis vapes that contain vitamin E acetate. And so while it's hard to shut down, the illicit market that operates kind of online, we can offer an alternative to it that, and as long as the price isn't so disproportionate, then I think most people would prefer knowing what's in their vaping liquid. Yeah. I'm gonna move on.
Absolutely. I think that was a really good example of where there's tension between us wanting to capture more things in the legal market that would otherwise be in the illicit market. And we have to think about the pricing and the tax rates. These are the questions and the tensions that all of the policy that Chair Pepper's putting before us will ask us to consider. So a perfect example.
Another just very rapidly developing portion of this industry that is very on point with this kind of online presence of an illicit market is hemp derived products. And there's another report that we submitted. This one I think is very alarming, but it's also just kind of really difficult to wrap your head around. And maybe I shouldn't go deep into it other than to say that, the federal government decided that there's going to be a difference for the purposes of the Controlled Substance Act between hemp and marijuana. Even though they're the same plant, there's a difference, and it's all based upon how much THC is in it. If it's less than 0.3% THC, so kind of an immature cannabis plant, then it's legally hemp. If it's above 0.3% THC, then it's a Schedule I controlled substance.
It's 0.03.
And there's a question.
Representative Nugent, then
Sorry, I think it's
Representative
0.03
0.03?
rather than 30%.
0.03? Okay, sorry about that.
Just big, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Did I hear you correctly? The difference is basically the age of the plant?
Well, there's a lot of genetics where people try and decrease the amount of THC and try and increase the amount of CBD. But, it's still the cannabis sativa plant. And, if you allow the plant to mature, the more THC will form. So you got to kind of harvest before it hits this magic threshold.
So a hemp plant could eventually turn into a...
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So what the Farm Bill failed to kind of realize at the time, because this is, again, a very rapidly evolving industry, is there are a number of other cannabinoids that are psychoactive in the cannabis plant that are not THC. And what kind of enterprising hemp producers have done is they've isolated those and they put them into vape cartridges, and they're totally unregulated. The legislature last year gave the CCB authority over hemp-derived products, and you asked us to submit a report about how we intend to regulate those. And so that is another report that you have on your website. Long and short of it is we're going to do our best. No state has figured this out, I should say. Every state is dealing with this. They've all taken a different approach. Some is just a free-for-all. We're just going to turn a blind eye to this. Others have kind of taken as extreme approach as you can. Just any hemp-derived product is illegal. We have a number of policy considerations for this committee to debate as to how you want us to approach them, but we've taken what we think is a sensible proposal and put it into a report. This leads me to the quality assurance program. This is kind of a pretty, what I consider a big ask, but I think it's a critical one. And it actually was in the original kind of S-241 that passed the Senate 5 years ago. There's an agricultural lab that does quality assurance. There's a quality assurance program at the Agency of Agriculture. We don't have the equivalent for cannabis. I think everyone thinks that the promise of a regulated product is that it's been tested and it's met some sort of minimum standards around pesticide usage and heavy metals. And we have established by rule probably the most stringent quality kind of testing standards in the country. We don't have the ability to kind of trust and verify other than we have private contracts with the existing labs in the state. So We would like to bring this capability in-house and expand kind of, it's not really an expansion of the ag lab because it would be us, but they don't have the capacity anyway. So it's either expanding the agriculture lab and allowing them to kind of touch this plant or giving us those same positions. It would be in the same building essentially as the current agriculture lab. But it's 3 positions and about $850,000 to purchase the equipment that would allow us to kind of pull products off the shelf, independently test them, and make sure that everything that, you know, they're saying on the label is accurate. And again, we are doing this now. We're just doing it through a private contract with our existing labs, but they're stretched for capacity themselves, you know, already. So essentially, you know, there's a number of reasons to kind of bring it in-house. There's a medical program. The medical program, you know, I heard the kind of conversation earlier. This program has seen very few significant updates since 2013, I think is the last time it's really been updated. The reason, I mean, what the result of that is that the numbers have dropped significantly to the point where, you know, you've created some incentives for for kind of people that want to participate in the adult recreational program to maintain their medical program. So kind of a little bit of a homeostasis right now, but the patient numbers are dropping precipitously. You know, we had a high watermark of in 2018 prior to home grow passing of around 5,600 patients. And then home grow passed and a lot of those patients dropped off. We saw about 1,000 people drop off. As it stands today, we have 3,700 patients. You know, a lot of these patients are, and we don't know where the kind of numbers are going to wind up. You know, now that we have adult recreational open, you know, the process of getting a medical card and keeping it current is somewhat onerous, especially if you're dealing with a very significant mental health issue or a health issue. And so we have a number of proposals that can help modernize the medical program, increase accessibility, affordability, and quality. I won't go into they're very technical, so I won't go into them here, but we do have kind of a bill that on the Senate side right now that does this, and it's very much kind of for this committee to debate the future of the medical program. Historically, it hasn't been here, but I think, you know, since the CCB is here and we oversee both, it's possible that it lands here.
So we'll probably end up looking at language that comes to us from the Senate on.
I think so.
Issues.
I think so.
Thanks.
You know, just the last kind of 3 things, it's really about, they're not necessarily issues for this committee, but they're things that are just constantly need, you know, we essentially the board can't do whatever we want. We have to kind of just look at the statutes, look at what you've authorized us to do and create regulations around them. And this idea of managing the supply chain, you know, encouraging testing facilities, encouraging more product manufacturing capacity. These are things that we can use this, you know, your help with. The banking and insurance, there's not a lot that this committee can do to expand access to banking and insurance options. However, there's things that we're doing. Department of Financial Regulation has been a great partner in trying to kind of tell banks that you can do this legally. You really can. You know, this FinCEN memo lays out a framework that even federally chartered banks can follow and bank cannabis funds. Problem is that the kind of National Banking Association has a memo out saying don't bank cannabis funds. The NCUA, the National Credit Union Association, has the opposite memo out saying please bank cannabis funds. Your states need this desperately. And so we've seen uptake in a number of credit unions. We invited them for a number of banking roundtables when we were drafting our regulations, say, what do you need from us in order to feel comfortable about our licensees and banking their money? And so they were very much a participant in helping us craft our regulations. And the more we can do to kind of bring them into the fold, educate them about compliance, and the more competition is, the fees will decrease. The problem right now is there's kind of a magic ratio of compliance staff at the banks, at the financial institutions, to the number of accounts that they're willing to hold. And that means that the fees for a cannabis banking depository account are somewhat astronomical. $500 a month, you know, it's just to park money. It's tough. We are just constantly monitoring that federal status and all the bills that change. The first standalone cannabis bill passed the federal government last year. It was a very small ball kind of thing. It expanded the ability for federally supported institutions to study cannabis. But I think, safe banking was very close to passing, and I think there's a lot of support for it. And, and then there's this constant conversation around, do we need to deschedule cannabis or do we need to reschedule cannabis? Should it remain a Schedule I controlled substance? So anyway, that's all I got for you. I know it's a lot, and I really appreciate any time you spend on this issue because it is a very rapidly evolving industry. And, we are a 3-member board. We have a decent, we're kind of staffed up now, but it's very hard across the country to kind of stay ahead of the innovation that happens in this field.
So I wanted to flag for the committee before we go to questions that an early draft of language that would resolve and clarify the application of the tax on e-cigarettes and vape products. I took it from an email between some of us chairs and made a PDF. I know that's being worked on, Ways and Means. I think what I'll be asking the committee to do is basically just sort of philosophically weigh in, not on the specific language, but on the idea, because it's really going to be appropriations and Ways and Means. We're just going to take a straw poll for our memo on the BAA, but the idea of, clarifying that, we're aware of this issue might be something that we think about commenting on in our BAA memo. So I will be asking you all about that, and we can get more testimony on it before we do the memo. But I sent a PDF with the initial draft language for Andrea to post on our committee website. So that'll be up shortly. It is there. Andrea's so fast, always. Also, before we get to questions, you have the rest of your board here with us.
I do, yeah, I apologize. Julie Holberg and Kyle Harris, just an incredible backgrounds on each. Julie, I don't know if you want to say, talk about your background at all?
I'd be happy to introduce myself. That's what you're, for the record, Julie Holberg, Cannabis Control Board Commissioner. Some of you have seen before, I came from the Ethics Commission prior to being on the Cannabis Control Board. I was also in municipal government for about 12 years, mostly in human resources, on my local select board.
Yeah, for the record, Kyle Harris, Commissioner with the Cannabis Control Board. I came to the Cannabis Control Board from the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, where I was an ag development specialist. I kind of split my time between ACCD and VAFM. Before that, I worked as environmental counsel in the agriculture space in DC. And just for a point of clarification on hemp, it is 0.3%. There is a safe harbor position up to, I think, 0.5% THC. And the way genetics are at this point in time, most genetics that are grown for hemp aren't going to test. They might test up to like 4 to 5% THC. And cannabis is a really finicky plant, depending on your humidity, your light, meaning how much sunlight a cannabis plant is getting, and the temperature. These THC levels fluctuate. So at the point at which it's tested or harvested, it could mean something. But you're not going to see hemp-derived THC test unless it's done through manufacturing at levels that you would see THC on the adult use side of things.
So I want to get everybody the sort of scale and a little bit familiar with the numbers. So just to clarify that, and so everybody hears that on the record. So 0.3%.
0.3% THC. Anything under that is considered hemp.
Right. Anything under 0.3% is considered hemp. And then you talked about how the genetics of the plant that's grown for hemp, there are times, depending on some of those factors, where it might go as high as 4%.
Ish. But they're getting, again, this is like it's a nascent legal industry, and the more those genetics are bred year in and year out, the more you can really start to look at the seeds or plants that you're getting and understanding what the THC content is going to be backstopped with that testing. But these are plants that are really responsive to the environmental conditions with which they're growing in. So it's hard to kind of put a bright specific line on what that THC content could be.
And then what are we talking about for levels for that are the strains that are grown for consumption?
I would say an outdoor cannabis, outdoor grown cannabis is somewhere in the realm of like 15 to 22% at the high end. We do have a cap in Vermont of 30% THC. So no plant, indoor environment, controlled environment agriculture. And through genetics, you can try to get up to 30%, but it's kind of a natural ceiling anyway. THC in a cannabis plant, 30%.
So we're talking about much higher, like orders of magnitude higher THC content in the strains that are grown for consumption than the hemp derived. Represented by.
So that was just for flower directly, right? So like extracts cap it. We're one of the only states that cap extracts. And what does that cap?
Yeah, it's Connecticut and us are the only two states that cap solid concentrate THC levels, and that's at 60 concentrates. Okay. So liquid concentrates can be, 80, 90%, but solid concentrates are capped at 60%.
Okay, gotcha.
Representative Higley.
Yeah, Chair Pepper, we've had a little bit of a conversation about it, but you see, there's two issues that I've heard about. Wondering if you think they're going to come before us. One is advocates looking for home delivery and folks that are concerned with labeling. And again, based on Colorado's new labeling, is that something that would, come before us as well to look at?
I think you're not going to see the board say we need delivery. It's not part of our mission, really. The industry wants it terribly, and we actually are one of the only, I think we are the only state that doesn't, adult recreational state that doesn't allow for delivery. The model if you want to go down that path, the model you choose will have a huge impact about kind of winners and losers. And of course, the board will need additional compliance and enforcement staff to do delivery. So if you want to debate delivery, I think you'll hear constituents and licensees say, we want delivery. Whether you decide to take it up, I think is a decision for you all. And then we will certainly be at the table kind of helping you see the national lay of the land. We actually do delivery on the medical side currently. So it's not, an impossible thing to pull off, of course. But I think that this committee, we would want to see a tremendous amount of legislative input if we were going to do delivery. On labeling, what you all told us is essentially have the Department of Health in the driver's seat when it comes to labeling. And that's what we've done. We have asked them for their advice on labeling. What they did was they looked at every other label in the country because they're all pretty standard. And they highlighted the things that they wanted highlighted on that label, and we approved it. If you want, what Colorado did is they have a label that's specific for these high THC solid concentrates. It's different than what they have for just regular flower or other THC products. And so if that's the kind of will of the committee, that's fine with us. Once again, we'll ask the Department of Health to kind of give us their advice on it.
Yeah, just another question I was noticing with the large number of cultivators. And you had talked about the retailers being somewhat geographically dispersed. But are the cultivators that way as well, or is that cultivator pretty much located in only a couple of areas?
Vermont has a lot of unique microclimates, and it leads to, and because there's such a huge number of outdoor cultivators, there is some clustering as well. Like the Mad River Valley is a different kind of climate than Glover, but there's no opt-in, opt-out provision for cultivation. So it's kind of a free market, it's kind of operating when it comes to cultivation. And last year there was a bill that said if you're an outdoor cultivator and you're on a farm that's subject to RAPs, required agricultural practices, and you meet a couple other criteria, then local zoning doesn't apply to cultivation if you're a tier 1 outdoor cultivator. And so, it's kind of, we don't try and interfere with the kind of geographic distribution of that too much at the board.
And if I could just follow up, you mentioned free enterprise, and I had mentioned this last year, I guess, as well. So these 270 current cultivators, they're competing for those manufacturers to make sure that they can buy their product. Is there any way of leveling the playing field, so to speak, or at least, how does that work? It sounds to me like with that number of cultivators and only that number of manufacturers, some of these cultivators are going to be left out in the cold, aren't they?
Yes, and we saw that with the hemp program when there was a huge, number of licenses granted on the cultivation side, and there was, very little manufacturing available, and people had hemp kind of rotting in their barns. I think one of the issues that if you talk to any of these licensees, any of these cultivators that you'll hear over and over again is they want to bring their products to the market themselves. They want to go direct to consumer. And while technically there is a path for that, I mentioned you're only allowed one license of each type, but we have at least 3 tier 1 small cultivators that also have a retail license. And, the problem is, I think what the farmers want is they want to think of this as like a cucumber or a tomato. They want to put it in their farm stands. They want to put it bring it to the farmer's market. And that currently wouldn't be allowed under our retail regulations just because of all of the advertising restrictions, because of all of the kind of, just cash management situations that we need to deal with and, safety and security issues. This is a high value crop. And so I think that we could get there to a direct to consumer situation, but I think we need to do it kind of in a careful and kind of balanced way. I don't know. Yes, they are all competing for the same spots, and because of the, preeminence of outdoor cultivation, they're all competing for those same spots at the same time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Other questions for Chair Pepper? Representative Chase?
You mentioned security and high value. Have we seen any significant change in the crime rates associated, like people trying to rob these organizations or whatever?
Not in Vermont. We're trying to learn the lessons of other states. There was a time out west, a lot of the early states were out west, where there was a lot of kind of smash and grab kind of situations. So we have learned a lot about product storage and kind of keeping the high value products not easily accessible and kind of security requirements. What we're seeing kind of now in the kind of more East Coast states, and it's not, it comes in waves and then it dies down, is kind of more sophisticated, like middle of the night, organized events that are targeted at the kind of places where the high value products are. We keep a close eye on this, and we have the benefit of kind of 10 years of experience from other states about what are best practices, but it is, again, a high value crop. And it's a largely cash industry, unfortunately.
Great. Any other questions before we release our Cannabis Control Board chair? I know we will be policy recommendations. We're still talking with our counterparts in the Senate about who's going to see your bill first. I think it's likely that it may originate in the Senate, but some things may start here. So we'll figure that out in the future. But just so you know, committee, I do plan on trying to give everybody the foundation that you need in order to understand some of these issues. So if you'd like to hear about specific aspects of the industry, I'd like to have some licensees come in and talk a little bit about their experience and what the industry is actually like, as it is pretty nascent. And I think it would be good to hear from some of them during our work this year. So we'll definitely be watching and making sure. I think to some of the questions about local jurisdiction, we probably do want to have some of the communities that are hosting as cultivators and retailers and the other types of licensees and see, what their asks on some of those local issues. So I think one of the good things about us having the jurisdiction here in Gov.Ops and military affairs is that we have all that, municipal charter and municipal government interface. And there are places where our other jurisdictions there's a Venn diagram of things that matter, start to overlap. So with that, one last call, Mike Maroki.
Just a personal opinion here. In other situations, if somebody with small children starts off with pictures of those children, it sort of paves the way. Now, the twins are not that small anymore, but pictures of the twins romping around.
Yeah. I actually had a Lucky Rock in my pocket that my 4-year-old said, I'm supposed to give this to mommy. And she's fortunately testifying up in commerce. So I ran up at her like 12:55 and gave it to her.
Kind of
made it back just in time for this. Yeah.
4 now? That's 8. Twin.
Yeah. And they're identical boys too.
Yeah.
So they're like, they're a handful.
All right.
And, my email address is my first name, last name at Vermont.gov, james.pepper at Vermont.gov. We are trying to be very responsive to questions, whether they're coming from the public or from the legislature. And so feel free, if you have questions or if your constituents have questions, to email me.
And we'll probably be ticking off some of the BAA items that we've covered in some conversation tomorrow. And then there are probably some things that we'll want to take a little bit more testimony or have the weekend to think about, and then apply to appropriations committee on those items early next week. So by Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest, I'd like to try and get that BAA letter out. So for you, Chair Pepper, to know that that's kind of our timeline. And I think appropriations wants to vote out the Budget Adjustment Acts by Friday so that's what they're shooting for anyway.
That's great.
Could go into the following week, I imagine. But I think since we'll all be hearing the governor's budget proposal and getting those the budget address, and we'll be getting the budget proposals tomorrow, that overlap when we're looking at budget adjustment mid-year and the budget at the same time can start to get confusing for all of us. So I know appropriations is anxious to get our recommendations and move on that. So with that, I think we are done for today. Giving everybody a little bit of constituent time and working on bills before we are on the floor at 3:00. And before we go off live, I want to take a moment of personal privilege here and introduce my father, Jack McCarthy, who was in here with the Vermont Superintendents Association. And it's pretty cool having my dad sit in on our committee. That's pretty wild.
As your former principal and superintendent, to make sure you really were here.
Backed off that attendance. All right. Thank you all. We'll be back tomorrow to have a committee discussion. So I'll get that put on our official agenda, but I do want to meet after the floor to talk about some of the BAA stuff tomorrow. So I'll schedule that and see you all tomorrow on the floor at 9:30.